The banners for version 3.1 in Wuthering Waves look really good, but who among the bunch is actually the most worth pulling? That's what I'm going to be talking about in this video by covering every character's pull value. Starting of course with the first character being Aemeath. Now Aemeath is going to be a fusion DPS and is going to be one of the strongest DPSs in the game. She's most likely going to end up being the strongest DPS in the game when it comes to raw damage output, which will put her at the cream of the crop when it comes to Tower of Adversity. However, when we start looking at Whimpering Wastes, she's likely still going to be incredibly strong, just not top tier. This is not because of any fault of her own, rather because Frolova is just kinda stupid. However, there is a caveat to this, because obviously Aemeath has her best in slot team, and she has some pretty good alternatives to this team as well. However, the primary issue that Aemeath faces is the second you start trying to make her work with things like 4-star characters or standard banner 5 stars. Because here's the issue. Aemeath will specialize in 2 archetypes. Fusion Burst, which does not have enough characters to make it worth using at the current moment, and then there's Tomb Rupture. But here's the issue with Tomb Rupture. Tomb Rupture damage is incredibly hard to buff. The only way you can currently buff Tomb Rupture is simply by giving Toon Break boost, which only one character is capable of at this current moment. Now you are able to remedy this by using a support that has an absolute ton of buffing. Think about someone like Lupa, for example. Lupa Mornia is going to be Aemeath's second best in slot team, and it's still going to absolutely dominate the entire game. But your best bet for a buffer from the standard banner or from the 4-star roster is John Shin. So if you're trying to run something like John Shin Mornia, you're going to see such a dramatic decrease that it's honestly kind of unfair. John Shin is just not a good character, and thus being forced to use her at low investment really hurts. It's honestly a better idea to skip her signature weapon and pull for Lupa, assuming you already have Mornia on your account. Because if you want to get her signature weapon and you're forced to use John Shin, that's going to absolutely demolish your faith in this character. She has literally everything else going for her, so if it wasn't for these issues at low cost, she would be an easy S tier. But because of her low cost issues, I'm gonna have to give her A+. Then for the second character running in the first phase, which is Lupa. Lupa is in her own right an incredibly powerful buffer, and I talked about her a bit earlier during the Aemeath section, so you kinda know what to expect. Lupa is the backbone of the entirety of the fusion element. If you have a fusion DPS, there's a very high chance they're going to be able to use Lupa to an incredibly good degree. Lupa's buffs are honestly kind of ludicrous. If you're running a mono fusion team, you get 15% fusion res ignore, you get 20% fusion damage bonus against bosses, 10% against any other kind of enemy, 15% fusion damage bonus from her set, and then you also get 24% fusion damage bonus from her signature weapon. But that's not where it ends either, because she also gives up to 18% attack, as well as her outro skill also buffing fusion damage and basic attack damage, making Lupa just an absolutely all-round incredible buffer for every single fusion character in the entire game. A Lupa Mornia core can be used with every single fusion carry in the game, and ends up being best in slot with most of them. It's Encore's best team, it's DPS Brand's best team, it's Aemeath's second best team, and it's arguably also the best team for Galbrena. The only exception to this rule is Chongli, but that's because she would rather use Lupa Brand, so you're still using Lupa with her. So ultimately, every single fusion DPS in the entire game ends up running Lupa. Honestly, there are grounds to put Lupa in S tier, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put her in A+ again, simply because she has that fusion restriction to her. So there is an argument to not pull this character. If you don't like the current fusion roster, you simply shouldn't get Lupa. And because she only really works with fusion characters, she doesn't get to be an S tier. And that brings us to the third character, which is going to be Chisa. Now Chisa came out literally the last version, and now she's getting another rerun. So ultimately not much has changed about this character. Everything that people said about this character on release still stands to this day. Now one thing you might be saying is, what about Aemeath with Fusion Burst and then running her with Chisa? Well, that could be a good future team comp, but we don't have a good Fusion Burst applicant yet, which leads to this team still being incomplete. So when we get that fusion for sub DPS, Aemeath with that sub DPS and Chisa is going to be a good team. However, until then, Chisa simply isn't going to see much relevance. Out of all the current teams in the game, Chisa only has one character that she's actually the best option for, which is Thundah. But for this, she actually requires her signature weapon to be better than Arrow Rover. And if you don't have that, Chisa simply is not the best option. If you're trying to run her with Aemeath anyway, and then you want to use Lene, that's honestly just going to be worse than running Shorekeeper. Zani has a multitude of other characters she would rather run, including Shorekeeper and Spectral Rover. And then DPS Phoebe would rather run Lene and Spectral Rover. So ultimately, Chisa only has one team, which she currently requires her signature weapon to be used in. She's going to get a team in the future, but you have to consider, is it really worth it to pull a character when that team simply doesn't exist yet? Because of these reasons, I can't give Chisa anything above a B, but I can very much see her value increasing in the future once we get more negative status-based teams. Now with the first half of banners out of the way, it's time to get to Phase 2, starting with Luuk. Luuk is going to be a Spectro DPS who deals primarily basic attack damage and focuses on the Toon Strain mechanic. So we have Aemeath for Toon Rupture and Luuk for Toon Strain. Now while his top damage output will not be as good as Aemeath's, he definitely does have some advantages over her. First of all being the low cost teammate section. While the amount of teams he has is lower than Aemeath, his low cost team is definitely a lot better than Aemeath's. This is because Luuk deals primarily basic attack damage, and basic attack damage has one of the best buffers in the game, being Thundah. Now Luuk does have one issue with Thundah, which is actually an issue that more and more characters are getting. Their rotations are very short, making it very hard to actually properly use Thundah. However, I don't think this is going to be a big deal in Luuk's case. It's very likely he is simply going to be able to extend his rotation by using more mid-air attacks. Mid-air attacks don't exactly have a cooldown or a forte meter tied to them. So if you need to extend your rotation by using a bit more of them, there's absolutely nothing stopping you. His signature weapon situation is also very close to that of Aemeath. He really does not need his signature at all, because the new standard banner gauntlets will buff basic attack damage when you attack enemies inflicted with Toon Strain interfered. Now isn't that just convenient that Luuk is a Toon Strain based character who deals primarily basic attack damage? He's going to be an incredibly accessible DPS who can easily run Thundah. Now he does quite want Mornia for the increase in off-toon buildup, but he very much is capable of using characters like Shorekeeper. Now I'm going to give Luuk a rating of A. The reason for this is because while he is pretty accessible, if you want a very strong DPS, you're most likely going to be looking at Aemeath. They both want Mornia, and Lupa is literally rerunning alongside Aemeath. So Aemeath is going to be the better pull, but do not let that fool you because Luuk is still going to be very strong. And that brings us to the final character banner of the version, being Galbrena. Galbrena is a very strong fusion DPS who has a blend of heavy attack damage as well as having some echo skill damage. While she may not have the greatest AoE wave clear, she definitely has very good bossing damage. Not to mention the fact that she has a very large amount of teammate variety. You can run the classic Choyuan Shorekeeper team, or a Lupa Mornia team, a Lene Mornia team, a Brand Lupa team, a Mortefi Lupa team. Honestly, this gal has just as many teams as Aemeath, which is very nice to see. And they all perform relatively similar to each other, unlike Aemeath where there is one clear best-in-slot team. Now, here's the thing. She's kind of a mix between Luuk and Aemeath because she has some of their upsides, but also has some of their downsides. Her upsides being the fact that just like the other two, she doesn't really need her signature weapon, and just like Aemeath, she has a ton of team variety, but also just like Aemeath, her low-cost teams are going to be pretty disappointing compared to her high-cost teams. Her Mortefi Shorekeeper team simply will not get you the same highs that something like a Choyuan Shorekeeper team will, and honestly, it's going to feel pretty weak in comparison. But also, just like Luuk, she doesn't really have the damage output that Aemeath has. So ultimately, when you're looking for a fusion DPS, and you're only looking for the meta answer, Galbrena literally should never be your option this update. If you're looking for a meta fusion DPS, you'd always want to look towards Aemeath. So ultimately, I'm going to rate her to be pretty similar to Luuk. They have a very similar damage ceiling, and while Galbrena has more teams that are this good, her low-cost teams simply aren't really that comparable. Luuk also doesn't really have a signature support yet at the moment, so in the future I can very much see Luuk simply surpassing Galbrena in all ways. But because that isn't the case yet, I'm going to give Galbrena the same rating of Luuk as A. But those are just my opinions. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description. And if you want to see more of me, you can check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. But that'll be all from me. Peace.